I'm Teresa McPherson. This is my husband, Les. I'm sure, are definitely wondering what we are going to talk about when it comes to the subject of sex. And I wish I could read your minds. I do. Because we live in a world that is full of sex everywhere we go. Whether it's on a billboard, whether it's on TV, whether it's in your college arena, whether it's when you're joking at work about it. It doesn't matter. If you were to statistically go through a day and count how many times there was some reference to sex, you would be absolutely amazed. We're here tonight, though, to help you see God's design for sex and how we personally traded it in for our own selfish motives, and we ended up with a whole lot of baggage. Satan is hoping that we would have been too embarrassed to show up here tonight to talk to you and to share our experiences with you. But we've proved him wrong every time we stand up here, because we're not. We've been through enough in our life that God has led us down the path to share our story, because we don't want anybody else to have to repeat that story. You've heard that it's wise to learn from experience, but it is wiser to learn from the experience of others, and so we're giving you that advantage tonight to learn from us. That's what we do here at Relationship Builders. That's what you do with your couples that lead your groups. And of course, we know that life is too short to learn everything by experience. In addition, some painful experiences can be avoided if you're smart enough to learn from models and mentors. And I would encourage you to do that every opportunity that you get. So tonight, we want you to see our struggles, not just our successes, because we grow as much from others' weaknesses as we do from their strengths. So we're going to give you a little bit of information about us. Les and I did used to teach RB. When we first got involved with Relationship Builders, you guys met like this every week. And we had some really huge classes. In fact, one of our biggest classes was like 35 couples. And what we found was that there couldn't be intimacy if we didn't take it into the small group setting. And so that's what we've now done with Relationship Builders. And we love Relationship Builders. It's a ministry that's really dear to our heart. We have been married for almost 22 years. And yes, this is our wedding picture. I know Les looks like he's about 10, but he really was of legal age when we got married. And in fact, often people used to say to me that I had 4 kids, not 3 kids. And sometimes I would agree with that statement.
Shoe fits.
Anyway, we have 3 children. 2 children were mine from a previous marriage. I have been married and divorced. And we have 1 child together. A little bit about my background. There's 4 of us kids. I am the oldest. My parents were divorced after 26 years of marriage, which really sent us kids into a tailspin. I was raised in a very fundamental, legalistic Christian home. And to describe that to you would be that my life was more a bunch of don'ts than do's. I couldn't wear makeup, I couldn't cut my hair, I couldn't wear jewelry, I couldn't wear pants, I couldn't go to dances, I couldn't watch TV, couldn't go to the movie. And certainly I don't look like that now. But I still, being the oldest, I still had a lot of fun in school. I loved school, I loved athletics. It was a lot of fun for me. It was much more difficult with my siblings, and I have 1 brother, and it was very hard for him. Basically, we couldn't participate in any extracurricular activities if they interfered with church. And so that meant that we didn't get to do a whole lot of athletics or much of anything. So I got married, and my parents were living here when I got married, and I was living in Wyoming for the first time. When I got married, I was far away from God. I had basically turned my back on him and said, this is not how I want to live. This is not what I want to do. And so when I got married the first time, my ex also came from a very conservative Christian background. He was raised Church of Christ. So any of you who know about Church of Christ would know what that is about. Both of us were far from God when we got married. Needless to say, our relationship was very volatile. We had a lot of problems. Had 2 kids. He was going to college. I was trying to work full-time. And so in the middle of that, I moved down here to Grand Junction to live with my parents and became legally separated. And I had our 2 oldest, Kristen and Derek, and they were very young. Derek was only 6 months old when I left, and Kristen was 18 months old. I moved here, and my life was literally a shambles. There wasn't anything good about my life at that time. And then to live in the house and watch my mom and dad become divorced literally just destroyed my life. Basically we were raised to know that divorce is wrong. God hates divorce, yes. But also when you get into legalism, for any of you who have been Christians, unfortunately, a lot of scripture can become twisted and theology becomes twisted. And so I ended up with theology that said if you are divorced, you could never remarry. And basically, if you did, there was no place in heaven for you. That was basically my options. So I came here and I found a job and scared to death about what I was going to do because I didn't know if I could live with my parents anymore. I made too much money to be on welfare and collect food stamps, but I didn't make enough money to pay rent for 2 little kids. So I was scared to death, probably the most scared I'd ever been in my life. And ended up going to work where Les worked and was going to college. And the rest is history, so to speak. So that's just a little bit of our background, and we think it's really important that you understand our background because it has a lot to do with where we were at in life when we met and some of the choices that we made that were not good choices. And so that's why we share that history with you. Go ahead.
Okay, well, my life was probably just about as different from Teresa's as you could get. I was the oldest of 11 children from a very blended family. My mom had been married and divorced 4 different times. I grew up on a ranch, pretty much did what I wanted, when I wanted, with who I wanted to do it with. So was a pretty wild kid all through high school and on into college. I spent 12 years, this is a kind of a side, but I spent 12 years in the Mormon church as well. So my background or my religious philosophy got a little skewed in there as well. So let's see. When Teresa and I met, we actually met. She was still married when we started dating. She wasn't divorced yet. So we got off on the wrong foot there right away. Except
my rationalization was I was legally separated, so it was okay. So I had documentation.
It worked for me too. So
Whatever.
But we actually ended up living together for almost a year before we were married. So we just kept piling on a lot of stuff that we had to deal with later on as we got on into our married life. I was working full time and going to school full time. Had an instant family when we were married. So I had all the guys at school that I was going with that I hung out with and drank beer with all thought, well, you've got to be crazy. So, and I probably was, but I really didn't know what God's plan was for us at that point in time. But I know that He had a really good plan for us. We spent probably the first 7 years of our married life were not a lot of fun. I mean, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of problems, more valleys than there were peaks. And but here we are 22 years later, still married. So God does have a pretty good redeeming quality.
In our society today, we have a difficult time talking about sex. We joke about it, we degrade it through filthy stories, movies, magazines, but we never really talk about sex the way the Creator designed it. And marital sex, the most important and the only appropriate kind of sex, gets ignored, and couples pay a fearful price when this reality happens. And certainly the world does not give us a picture of the way that God designed sex to be. So the paper on your table is for you to answer
The index card.
the index cards. And we're going to ask you 2 questions, and we want you to write down the question and the answer that you're going to do, and you're going to use this as homework later to talk about, because as you'll see, some of our underlying issues with sex come from a lot of different areas in our life. So, the very first, does everybody have their cards? Okay. The very first question is, everything I learned about sex I learned from, and answer the question. From your parents, your friends, your dog, your neighbors, whatever it is, you write down what you learned from where. Okay, second question. When we say the word sex, what are the first words that come to your mind? And don't think a lot about it. Is it guilt, shame, dirty, naughty, sinful, fear, know-it-all? Whatever it is that comes to your mind, you write down. When somebody says the word sex, what do you first think of right off the bat? And then we would like you to take these and discuss these questions with your homework that we're going to give you later to do.
Okay, so the question I have for you is, what's God's view on sex? And the truth is that God made sex. He made it for us. He gave it to husbands and wives as a gift. And it's something that really should be treasured and cherished, enjoyed and protected. And really the best place for that is in the marital bed. Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 tells us that God created us as sexual beings. So God created beings in His image, and in the image of God He created them, and He created them male and female. So we need to remember that God had a purpose when He did that. There's nothing unspiritual or unclean about the marital sexual relationship. So if sex is God's gift to husband and wife, then we should not attach any shame to it at all. And so oftentimes we end up doing that. In Genesis 2:25 says, the man and his wife were naked, but they were not ashamed. And the shame came afterwards when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, and then they were sent out. So the Bible does have a great deal of practical and explicit teaching about love and sex and intimacy. And in fact, there's an entire book in the Bible. And if you haven't read that book, I would highly encourage it. And that's the Song of Solomon. It's that instruction manual of God in the Bible for really what God planned for us to enjoy with our spouse. It's filled with topics on love and sex and intimacy, and really what His plan for a married couple is. It takes a specific couple. It gives 7 snapshots throughout 8 chapters related to attraction, dating, courtship, sexuality, and marriage. It covers the whole relationship aspect. They both experience desire and passion, yet their desire is always in the right context, and the timing is always perfect in the book. And that's the one thing that's really encouraging. And a passionate fire builds between the two of them, and that fire is maintained throughout the relationship. And we actually have a book. It's called the Book of Romance, and it's really an expanded version of the Song of Solomon. And you can see Teresa, when she reads, she has these little yellow tabs, and she tabs everything. So it is well tabbed.
And this really is a good book. Tommy Nelson takes the Book of Solomon and he walks you through it. And I'm telling you what, there's some stuff that you read in here, you think, oh my gosh. And what you kind of look at it and say, especially if you're looking at it and you really haven't related sex and God, you see and hear just how passionate God is about sex and how much He wants it for married couples and where He wants it to go and what He wants us to do with it. So this is a very good read.
And also tonight we have lots of resources that we've brought with us. So when we have a break, come up and take a look at it, and feel free to browse.
Importance of sex. When you are married, sex will be one of the most important parts of your life, whether you want it to be or not. 2 biggest issues that come up in marriage: sex and finances. Good and bad. It's just the way it is. Sex, as God intended it, is enjoyed to the utmost when each spouse is completely transparent and open. We have to become willing to practice how to be a better lover. We need to spend time thinking of ways to keep sex fresh and fun in marriage. We even need to study our spouse to discover what fulfills them sexually. This is where we honor each other with honesty. And we'll talk a lot about that. When we have baggage, in order for us to get rid of the baggage, we had to learn how to be honest with each other. Honesty deepens our relationships and allows us to be transparent with one another. And this is probably one of my favorite things that I wore for the very first part of our marriage, is a mask. I was the most unhonest, hidden deep kind of person you could imagine. And what it did was it shielded Les from the truth about what was going on in my heart when it came to sex and marriage and intimacy. And the best thing you can do is to confess it, because you know what? God knows it anyway. He knows every aspect of our life, everything we've said, everything we've done, good and bad. So you can experience freedom from your past when you learn to give it to God and let it go. Every husband and wife should take a responsibility of acquiring the necessary information to ensure that you are both sexually satisfied. We read books on how to train children, how to cook, how to walk in faith and joy, how to handle our finances. So why not a good Christian book on how to have great sex? And we have some of those books over here.
And they're not from the 24-Road bookstore.
No.
They're from the book. They're from
Christian
the bookstore
bookstore.
Up at the church or
Yes.
CBD.
So, and in fact, one of the best resources that we love, and we'll put these books down there when we're done, is a book called Intended for Pleasure, Sexual Technique and Sexual Fulfillment in Christian Marriage. This is probably one of the most thorough books you will ever read. If you're a person who has a hard time talking about sex, this book will make you blush. These are two Christian, this is a Christian doctor and his wife. And this is an amazing book. Yes, some of these books have pictures in them. Surprise, surprise. And so, again, the more you learn, the better you get. A fulfilling sex life is one of the most powerful marital glues that you will have in your marriage. A sexually fulfilled man is a better father and a better employee. A sexually fulfilled woman has less stress in her life and more joy. So you can see that sex is vitally important to a healthy marriage. When we accept that God is pleased when a married couple satisfies themselves sexually, it removes any doubt and it frees us to release ourselves and express ourselves freely. In fact, for women, God created us to be our most sexual in a pure environment. And statistically, the most satisfied sexual women are conservative, Protestant women. Private closeness results in a public expression of unity and commitment. And we always laugh about that because there's a lot of times that people, even after being married for almost 22 years, knowing each other for almost 23 years, we hold hands, we kiss in public, that's what happens when you have a good relationship and you experience sex like God planned it to be in your marriage.
And we used to say it made our teenage kids sick, but we don't have teenage children anymore. They're all in their 20s. So.
And we didn't really care if it made them sick anyway. But
they still don't like
children are able to sense the security that flows from their father and mother, and they witness the way they communicate and respect one another. This example is set for them to duplicate one day with their spouse. And that was a big deal for us. I grew up in an environment where you talked about, and it was hard for my mom to have that discussion when we got the little book about the birds and the bees, and it's like by the time I really had that discussion with her, I knew a whole lot about it. But never in a way that Les and I knew and decided to make sure our kids were educated about sex. We wanted them to know it was healthy. When our door was closed and there was a sign on it, they knew what was going on and it was okay. We joked about it. In fact, you guys would laugh. Our oldest that's married and has been married for 4 years, they have been RB leaders. So they have been in this talk often. And some people are sitting there going, I can't believe you're having this talk and your daughter's sitting there. And it's like, yeah, and the point is what? The point is our kids get sexual impressions from what we live at home. And I didn't want my kids to have what I had growing up as a sexual impression. I wanted them to understand what God's design for it was and how healthy and fun and the glue that it did to hold us together. So that is so important, what our kids see.
And guys, one of the biggest issues, and I'm really talking to the guys here, that really lacks in any marriage is affection. And it's tough for guys to be affectionate. Most guys just don't learn that. They're not taught that. It's not modeled for them. They didn't see it in their home when they were growing up. But it really is important, and it's really important because that's when your wife or your spouse is going to know that they're truly loved. And here's some ways to establish affection in marriage. You need to show affection often. But guys, this is one area that's really key. Don't confuse sex with affection because they're two different things. And it's key in that. It's key to know really what the difference is. Talk about what pleases your spouse, but never withhold affection to punish your spouse. Withholding affection is not something that you don't want to do as well. Plan spontaneity into your marriage. Don't wait for your spouse to show affection first, and that really is key, especially for guys. If you need to, write it in your day planner. I need to be affectionate today. Whatever it takes, do it. And we might laugh about that, but it just has to happen for some of us. Be patient if your spouse is unaffectionate and doesn't reciprocate. Be patient with that, and things will take place. And also try new things to please your spouse. But if your spouse, don't be critical if your spouse fails on the other side of that coin as well. And one of the things that we really need to look at and learn from, especially, and this just isn't for the guys, this is for you girls as well, is our past mistakes. And it's normal and natural for an engaged couple to feel just a driving passion for one another. I mean, there's something that brought you guys together anyway, whether it was how they looked when they were walking down the hall, or their eyes, or their smile, whatever it was. There was something that attracted you to them. But God, who created that desire, really wants you to wait for that, and receiving the blessing that comes with that, through being pure and free from past entanglements and bondages. Your marriage's chance of survival are based on you and your spouse's level of self-control. And there are all kinds of statistics out there about having premarital sex and how many marriages fail if you've been down that road. And for us, it was a real big struggle as well, because we were sexually active before we were married. Thing that God asks us to do as single men and women is make sure that we have strong character qualities and build the boundaries that we need in order to do that. And when I talk about boundaries, I mean set those boundaries out there to where when you know you're getting close to the edge, you're still a long ways from being where God doesn't want us to be. So just as God endorses sex within marriage, he also clearly says that sex outside of marriage is disobedience to his laws. He not only says don't, but he warns that premarital sex has a heavy price to pay. Sex is the only action in the Bible where it's a sin before marriage and it's holy after marriage. So that's a great example for us to look at. Our acceptance of premarital sex for the last 40 years has deeply changed our understanding of what married sex is supposed to look like. We've absorbed the idea that married sex is supposed to be just a constantly mind-blowing experience, swinging from the chandelier type thing, or running down the beach, whatever it may be. We see all the examples in the movies and shows on television.
And the women always have their hair just right and their makeup just right, and everything's just perfect.
So for me, once I take my glasses off, it wouldn't make any difference anyway.
He's blind. So I have an advantage.
But one of the things that we like to demonstrate with Teresa and I, it ended up being our premarital sex, not only with each other, but our other past sexual experiences with other individuals. It tended to really create a wall for us, a real barrier for where we were at, especially